Alrighty. So we're recording. Thank you all again for being here and for having me. I'm going to set my timer so that I don't go over. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me again. I'm Wesley Myrick with the Georgia Interfaith Public Policy Center. So a little bit about our organization, just for those that didn't hear it the first time. Our goal in our work is really to work with faith-based institutions, particularly clergy and lay leaders like yourselves who are working in community, to teach you how to do public policy advocacy. We will do general trainings just like this, but we will also come back and do very more specific trainings on a topic of your choosing. So you'll hear later on, this is really focused on education and immigrant refugee legislation that's been coming through the state capitol this session. But we're happy to do any other types of any other focus points in terms of the trainings. We work in accordance with our values. So any of the policies that we either support or work to have not, other people not support are rooted in our shared values, which are love, justice, mercy, and hospitality. And so that's our guiding light. We are a center road organization, so we're nonpartisan. We don't care about party affiliation or anything like that. We want to make sure that there's just good public policy that reflects our values, and we do the work to support that, mostly through coalition. So you'll see in the PowerPoint, you'll see our board of directors. We are lucky that we have members of the board that are bishops. So we have the bishop of the United Methodist Church, the bishop for the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the bishop for the Episcopal Diocese of Georgia as members of our board. We have founding board members and leaders who have already transitioned off of the board that were connected to the Episcopal Diocese in Atlanta, other notable churches like Ebenezer. And so, we have a pretty interesting mix of leaders. Our focal point really is just serving as a unifying voice. We don't want to fight people. We just want to have, again, good public policy that reflects good values. So I mentioned our coalition partners. So we work with organizations like the Interfaith Children's Movement, which focuses on children that are essentially school age up until about 22. So they do a lot of work with organizations or with kids that are aged out of foster care. We also work with organizations like Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. So they work on resiliency. And so environmental stewardship work for faith-based institutions. And then we've done a lot of work this year with the Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. There's a bill right now that we'll talk about in a little bit that is focused on persons with intellectual disabilities and making sure that they're not subject to the death penalty in the state. And we also do a little bit of work with the Carter Center. We did a lot of election observing and just sort of support for that during this past election, just making sure that people had ways of reporting and observing if we had safe elections, which was really important for the work that they do around, as they call it, democracy resilience. So a little bit about our programming. So we have a thing called the Paul Society. It's really focused on us doing small group conversations just like this, going into institutions, whether it's a workplace or a camp or any institution where people gather, and making sure that we're having facilitated conversations. We're hoping to do. We have one more planned. I'll be at another Catholic church here next week, so I'll be right back next Saturday. Let's see, the name escapes me, but yes, ma'am, got it. Know it offhand, perfect. So that's our next stop. We also have a program called One House, One Home. That is focused actually on sort of two steps or two tracks. The first track is one, making sure that we're working with faith-based institutions who are interested in affordable housing. So if you have land and you want to have that land be put into production for either small scale multifamily development, so 8 to 4 bedrooms or 8 to 4 units, or if you're interested in building single family homes on that property, we'll work with you on that as well. We do that work in partnership with a company called Home 8 Georgia, which is another nonprofit that works with the Home Builders Association, so for the state. And so they donate time and resources to build those homes, very similar to sort of a habitat model, but they do it at cost. And all of their volunteers are skilled laborers. So unlike Habitat, right? Like they have a skilled laborer that oversees it. Homemade has a model where it's all the regular tradespersons who are doing the work. So that's one line. One line. The other track there is actually working with our municipal leaders. So we'll go and talk to city council members. We'll talk to county commissioners about what sort of processes have to be in place so that the zoning or the permitting process, the cost associated with building those sorts of developments can be streamlined. One of the big challenges of building affordable housing is that the permitting process takes a lot of time. The water main, sewer, electrical, all those sorts of what we call pre-development work takes time and takes money. If we can streamline that process, it will lower the cost of housing production quite a bit, which means we can build more affordable housing. So we're working to do that now in Palmetto and in LaGrange, and we'll hopefully be doing some work in Augusta very shortly. Okay, so that's all. That's it about us. So the rest is all focused on the fun stuff, which is the actual advocacy work. Oh, thank you, thank you. It's my favorite. The only title in our democracy superior to that of the president is the title of citizen. I think so often people are just like afraid to get started, don't know where to begin, don't really figure like they have a voice. We absolutely do. So whatever you're passionate about, let's go out and talk about it to people, right? Talk about it to your neighbors, talk about it to your fellow parishioners and congregants. Just let people know what you care about, and then oftentimes you're at least I've always been surprised you're surprised what people also care about, and you find a point uh of unity between people you didn't necessarily think you might have something in common with. So I love that quote. All right, so let's talk advocacy. So you all are pretty sophisticated already, so you know most of this. So it's a quick review. So we have a two party or two sorry words. Rewind. All right. So first and foremost, our legislative in the state of Georgia are part-time, right? So they all have other roles, right? They have full-time jobs typically in addition to their role as legislators. That cuts both ways. It both helps you because legislators come to the work with their own knowledge, but it also means that they're really focused on being a lawmaker for a short period of time because they have to be in session, and then they go back home to their communities where they get to be in community with all of you and understand what the needs of their communities are so that the next time they're in session, they can go and do the work that you say is important. So it's really, really critical that we talk to them while they're at home because during the session, they're jam-packed and full of, and have no time. So we only have about 40 legislative days here in Georgia. Our session runs from January till first week or so of April. So our last legislative day actually is going to be next Thursday. So it's coming to a quick close. We've done our 40 days just about. And it's a biennial session. And so what that means is laws that are, it basically goes through a 2-year cycle. So this year, any law that didn't cross over, so it didn't move from one chamber to the next on March 6th, isn't going to go away entirely, but it won't get voted on this year and it won't become law this year. Now, what that does mean is that that same law will sit in a hopper. It'll sit in the legislature's queue, if you will. So it can come back next session as the bill that it was, or the legislator can choose to cut out pieces of it, attach it to another bill that did cross over by what's called a substitution, and then that law or that potential bill could still become law. So even in the couple of days we have left, there's still opportunity for a lot of that to happen. And actually, this is the time when most of it starts to happen. You see pieces of a legislation get cut out of one bill, attached to another, and all that work will happen in committees. And so we'll talk through that in just one second. So the one thing that the Georgia legislature has to do, they have to pass the budget. That's their only constitutional requirement. And so on average, the General Assembly sees around 2,000 pieces of legislation each cycle. Only about 200 of those pieces of legislation actually get, make it across and get voted on to become law and get signed by the governor. So it's, 10% essentially. So if you can imagine 40 days, 2,000 pieces of legislation, none of which are short typically, it puts that workload into perspective. So when legislatures don't call you back, it's not because they're ignoring you necessarily. It's because they've got a very short window and a lot of work to get done in a very short window. We know there are two chambers, the House and the Senate. I would always say, in terms of advocacy, we start with the Senate because they're a smaller group. That's not to say that the House isn't important. It's just easier to talk to 56 people versus 180. And again, once they're at home, you can talk to your House reps and your senators a whole lot more easy. But when you're trying to catch everybody in a very short window when they're in the Capitol, it's easier to focus on senators. So just sharing that at the onset. So the next page talks about the approval process. So this is really important in part because this is how the work gets done, right? So we have the bills that are introduced. So they get introduced, they're drafted by typically by legislative aides, right? So believe it or not, our General Assembly men and women are not always the people that write the legislation. Remember, they are other professionals typically. So they might be doctors, attorneys, even school teachers, right? Like they have other jobs that are important to them. So they do this work predominantly more focused for just the General Assembly, right? During the session. So once those bills are introduced, there's what's called a first read. That's just the general introduction, and the committees understand what the bills are going to say. So they have an understanding of them, and it gets assigned to a committee. Once it's in committee is really where the work happens. So House and Senate both have a series of committees. They don't always mirror each other. So for instance, because the House is larger, it has more committees, and those committees aren't always a one-to-one. So for instance, when we talk through the select committees in a second, you'll see that there's sometimes a House version and the Senate version might look different just in terms of the name, but their oversight and their functions are very similar. Also in committee work, so you have the subject matter committee. So for instance, judiciary or education, which we'll talk through in a second. You also have what's called the rules committee for each chamber. And that's essentially where the legislation moves to once it's been voted on from committee. And that's a procedural committee. It makes sure that all the bills that came out of the subject matter committee are, properly formatted and are ready for a floor vote. So sometimes, and that's a very important function in part because the rules committee really determines which pieces of legislation actually go before the full body for a vote. So sometimes there are things that come out of committee that never still see the light of day, so to speak, right? Because the rules committee doesn't advance them to a floor vote, and that's part of their power and authority. So when people say, a bill is stuck in rules, then that's sort of what they're referring to. There's a chairman, there's a whole other process for that rules committee in terms of how they set which pieces of legislation move forward. So if you're talking about a way of intervening and a way to do advocacy, just building relationships with the chairs of the rules committees can be a really powerful means of doing that work. All right, so we'll talk a little bit through that in just a second. So once it comes out of committee, it goes to rules, it goes back to that chamber, uh, and then it gets voted on for a vote. So, and this is that part where I mentioned earlier called crossover. So if I have a bill that originated in the House, it gets out of committee, they say yes, they send it to rules says yes, the general House body will then vote on it, and then it gets sent over to the other chamber. So from the House to the Senate. Now the Senate has to go through the same process, right? They have to read it. Has to be assigned to a committee. That committee has to review the language to make sure that it is the same, right? Sometimes they change the language, and that's often. And then from there, it has to go to what's called a conference committee. So that's where those changes, if there are any changes between the versions that were passed by each chamber, they reconcile them and they say, okay, this really matters. This doesn't matter. This is the version we can live with, right? And then that goes to the governor for final approval. And so there's lots of opportunities for legislation to change once it comes out of committee. Generally speaking, though, if you're in a position to get it out of committee and it's gotten out of one chamber into the second, fewer changes are likely to happen earlier in the session. This time of year, like in the last week of the session, is when you start to see all those you call them riders, right? All the horse trading, all the pieces of oh well, we need, $10,000 for this bill, and let's do this and let's add that and pull this. That's just how the sausage is made, unfortunately. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to repeat your question just for the Zoom. So the question is, uh, would it ever happen that there's a piece of legislation that starts in both chambers and they work at them in tandem? So that's absolutely the case. That's it can happen. It's rare because oftentimes politically, right, members of the House have a process for how they want things done, and the Senate's the same way. What'll happen is more commonly is you will have what's called a companion bill. So you'll start it in one version, one chamber, and then follow it with another version. So that way they're close, but they're not running neck and neck. Companion bill. Yeah. So one of the bills we're going to talk about, HB 123, which talks to the intellectual disabilities bill that I mentioned earlier, has a Senate companion bill. It was introduced about 4 weeks after HB 123, and it was the process for that is somewhat tenuous because they didn't have a lot of co-sponsors to start, and that's part of the process. You have to build that community of legislators that support it, and then you really kind of want them to muscle their colleagues and to say, hey, can you support this bill? It's a good bill, and this is why. That takes time typically, and because the House and Senate aren't always on the same schedule, it's hard for them to do it in tandem, but they usually run them back to back. Any other questions? Feel free to just shout them out. So yeah, so that's the approval process, and again, this time of year is when you start to see a lot more bills get slice and dice. But the good thing is now that the session is going to be coming to an end, we have an opportunity. If there's any legislation that's pending, you now get to talk to your legislators when they're at home, when they're not as stressed, and explain to them why things are important to you or why you don't like a particular piece of legislation, and get their opinions on things without it being subject to the pressures of being in the session. All right, so on to select committees. So I wanted to pull these specific committees because we're going to talk a little bit about uh, education, but also some immigrant and refugee work. So these are the two House and Senate committees that mostly handle those types of legislation. So on the House side, you have the House Education Committee, which is chaired by Representative Chris Irwin, and then you have the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, which will handle most of the immigrant and refugee work. On the Senate side, if you'll notice, the Senate committee is a little different. It just says public safety, right? So it doesn't have the Homeland Security component, in part because the Senate has another committee, which is uh, Defense and Homeland Security. So they're slightly different. And these correlate pretty well, but there are some instances where the House and Senate chamber committees are totally different. Like they don't even have the same name, but they have very similar scopes, which is unique, I'll say. And so I also wanted to point out you have the chairs here because the chairs set the agenda. They set the tone for each of those committee meetings. So if you're looking to have a piece of legislation move through those committees, you really want to befriend the chair. They will decide if a piece of legislation comes up for vote. They will decide if a piece of legislation has public comment. So if there's something that's particularly, politically helpful for a particular party, they're going to want to have public conversation about it. So people are on the record as having supported it or not supported it, right? And the chair sets that tone. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, can chairs shut it down if they don't want public comment? And that's absolutely the case. That's why, again, we think of advocacy at the grassroots level as building relationships because that's ultimately what it is, right? We hear a lot about, high price lobbyists who go into communities and essentially buy votes. 9 times out of 10, it's not nearly that straightforward. It's that lobbyists know legislators because it's their job, right? So they know them intimately. They go fishing on the weekend or they go hunting with them. They have existing relationships that they extend beyond the Capitol, right? So again, this is why I said this time now when session's about to be over and people are just home and living and having life is really when you want to go talk to people so that they understand. Yeah, sure. So they gotcha. You just want to, that's when you want to make sure you're talking to people because it's so much easier just to have a conversation with your neighbor than it is to say, oh, I'm going to go talk to my state senator in their office at the Capitol during session when they come out of a committee meeting. They're late for the next one because it just moved. And I can't stress this enough. Their schedules change daily. So So the question on the recording is, do we recognize how this sounds to people who have to hear it? And you're absolutely right. I do. And this is why we're having these conversations. This is exactly why we wanted to do these trainings. Yes, ma'am. Well, there's another way. There's another way. That's just one way. That's just one way. No, no, no. I totally understand. So to your point, that is exactly how people feel about the process. You're absolutely right. But there is a way. That's one way. There are other ways, and we're going to talk about them. Yes, ma'am. All right. So let's. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. No. So the question is, how do you start to build relationships? So we talk about that toolbox on the next page. That's all. Yes, ma'am. The question is, should not legislators be reaching out to us? And you're absolutely right. They should. And they do intend to. And I don't want to paint them as that guy. Again, they're busy. That's no excuse. We're all busy, right? I think the challenge is, and this is what we found in our work, is that you have to give people a reason to one, understand your issue, because again, they're looking at 2,000 pieces of legislation. They may or may not be experts on any of it, right? Because they have other roles, right? um Sometimes a person who sits on the judiciary committee is not an attorney, right? We don't have that expectation of our legislators, nor necessarily should we. What we should expect of them is that they will read the legislation and come to a conclusion based on what their constituents want. And so it's really important that if you have a legislature who is not listening to you, you go to their office, you email them, you call them, you get them to know who you are, what your issues are that are important to you, and make them listen, because they work for us, right? And they do. They do. I promise you. I hear you. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll have some tools. So the first thing is first, right? During the session, phone calls to their offices get logged, right? So if ever there is an issue, if they vote for something that you don't like, or if they don't vote for something you do like, call their office. They all have legislative assistants or aides who have to log their calls. And so they get a report at the end of each week on who called about what legislation and if people are for it or against it. And it does make a difference, because think about it. I'm going to find another legislator so I can stop butchering the word, but most elected officials only hear from constituents sparingly. They don't hear from the public. It's one of the reasons why when they do a town hall, it's often surprising if it's a rancorous one, right? Because sometimes, most of the time, we don't show up to those sorts of engagements, right? So it's all the more important that we do. It's all the more important that you call and say, I'm a constituent, so lead with that. Because if you're not, then unfortunately, because elected officials have lots of people reach out, they need to hear from the people that put them there. It's better if you can get someone who is a constituent to call them. And so that's why when we talk about organizing, having a broad coalition is really important. That way, let's say, if I live in, because I know Macon has like 4 different House districts. So if you're in, let's say you're in district, I think it's 41, I might be misremembering, but if you know someone who lives in that district who supports an issue and their person is the chair of this committee or on this committee, get your friend to call, because their staff will listen to the fact that, hey, I've got a constituent who cares about this piece of legislation. I need to, one, review what they said and maybe adjust my opinion on it. And if you get one call, that's helpful. If they get 10 calls, then they really pay attention, because people don't call. We talked earlier about, when we were just chatting around letter writing, it makes a difference. How many people write letters anymore? So you really have to be kind of passionate about a particular topic to write the letter. and then making sure that that legislator gets it and is either you hand deliver it or you have a group of parties deliver a bunch of handwritten letters. Either or, any written correspondence. I mentioned letters because that's what. I don't think it could hurt. I think if that's easier, that works too. Any sort of written correspondence will be helpful. Remember, they're not hearing from the public. They're hearing from lobbyists, they're hearing from other special interests. They don't hear a lot from the public. So they really do pay attention when we call. It may not feel like it, but they do, particularly at the state level, maybe less so in other spaces, but at the local level, city council members, county commissioners, um, state reps and state house members, they will listen. I've one of my before I came into this role, I worked in the mayor's office for the city of Atlanta, and one of the I've seen very good policy die on the vine. Not because it was bad, not because it hurt people, but because there was a small group of advocates who said, we don't like the impact of this bill. And again, I won't get into the specifics, but it wasn't terrible. It was innocuous, right? But a very savvy communicator talked to a small but powerful lobby group, and they say this is going to hurt your constituency, and they mobilized their constituents. And every city council member got 250 calls and 250 emails, and they all said no. And this is, I mean, again, the policy would have been helpful to some people in community, but it didn't. It got voted down just because people did not like it. Right? The public said no, and so they paid attention. It can happen. It doesn't always feel like it, but it can. I promise you.
Say get a friend that is in that district to reach out. If I'm going to reach out to people myself, is it effective? Do they look up do I provide my address? I don't understand. If I provide my address, then they can see what district I live in. Is that do they get more credence to a comment from a constituent than from somebody else who's interested?
Yes. So the question is, do state senators give more credence to a constituent versus a interested party? Answer is yes. But here's the caveat. So I'm not always gonna my house rep, right, isn't on any of the committees that I care about, right? But remember the process. It comes to a general body vote. So even if they're not on the committee, they can still have a vote when it reaches the chamber. So you want them to be aware of the piece of legislation and why you don't support it, whether they vote on it in committee or not. So that's the relationship you want to cultivate is the person who represents you so they know when you email or call about a topic to listen. Now, to your point around your address and how they know you're a constituent or not, if you email them through the state website, they're going to ask you for your address. It's part of the form. So they'll ask you that online. So they'll verify and they'll say, "Oh, well, you're a constituent. Thank you for reaching out. We'll let the rep or senator know." If you reach out and you're not a constituent, they'll still get the email. It just gets lower in their queue. If you Right. So you still in that point, your strategy should be to reach out to all of your legislators because they still have to vote on it if it comes out of committee. Now, if it never reaches the floor, then they'll never vote on it anyway. At that point, you can still reach out to the committee chair and say, this is not something we support. So
That members that yes, we reach out to the chair. Does it do any good if we are not constituents of any of those people that serve on the committee? Does it do any good to us to contact the people that serve on the committee?
yes, ma'am, it does. It does. Because remember, they're looking at the volume of feedback. They don't get a lot of feedback. And so if we have a room of 20 people and two of us are from that district and 18 of us aren't, fact that they got 20 emails about something, and they aren't going to be, spam emails. They're going to be, hi, I live in this community. I think this is a bad policy, or I think it's good policy. Please vote for it. Please vote against it. That's more feedback than they're getting most of the time. That's special, and they know it's coming from real people. So the latter. So they want you to tell them what you believe, why, and to that extent, it's helpful if you tell them why you're against it. You can say, hey, this piece of legislation is going to run up my property taxes, or it's going to, make my crosswalk not as helpful, right, for kids and such. It's helpful to add that context, depending on who the person is, because every legislator is different. They may or may not care as much. But here's the rule of thumb: as the electorate, right, as the people that put people in office, us, the every person, right, the more we communicate about what we want, the better. Because then they can't say, oh, I didn't know you didn't like this, or I thought this was a good idea. Because remember, they're talking to their fellow legislators who are telling them, Senator Smith, this is a really good policy because it's going to help, us raise money, or it's going to help bring business, or it's going to help do X, Y, and Z, right? So they're listening to their colleagues, and they're listening to lobbyists who are giving them all the benefits and saying, oh, this is great policy because X, Y, and Z. They need to hear from the public. And again, sometimes, and I'm not saying that, every piece of legislation out there is terrific, but everybody will have a perspective, right? It's going to be good or bad to someone. And if only one side is speaking, right, then then that's it. They hear what they hear. So it's really important to voice your perspective, no matter the policy and no matter where it sits. I know, I know. But they care. They do. They do. I promise. Yes, ma'am.
Put the dollar sign beside the name of the person who contacts them, does that mean that those of us who don't have dollar signs need more of us than the people who have dollar signs?
So I would say it's always helpful. No, I know. It's always helpful to have numbers, right? So the more you can reach out, the better. I am not so cynical, right, that I think that you have to have money to make a difference, right? Because again, they only can benefit if they get reelected. They don't get reelected. And we're going to talk through all this in a second. So to answer your question directly, there are tons of special interest groups. There are tons of people out there that are trying to convince them to vote a certain way. It's our duty to be the counterweight to all that special interest, right? Um, yes, ma'am. But and we do that by showing up, right? So there are, and again, I know this process feels challenged at times, and it's not an easy one, but it's worth it, right? What we've done a lot of this cycle is we've said to people, say what you can, do what you can while you can, and then once you reach your breaking point, call on a friend, right? Lean on each other because there are just tons of different policies out there. We're going to talk through about 12 different ones, but those are just the ones. Most of those ones actually came through one house and moved to the other, but there are again hundreds others that are still just sitting there that could potentially come back in various ways that support this group and that group, and it's just really important that we stay vigilant.
You help me do something. I, you know, we live in different districts, but suppose we all wrote our appropriate person, and then they talked about it and they discovered that I heard from somebody about that too.
That's exactly right. We that's
So
exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
y'all come up with a project and I'll follow
That is, I love it. But yeah, the referendum. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So actually, that's one of the things that we offer. So that's on our website. You can sign up as a subscriber and get access to well, we have bill track software that will lay out. It basically we track like 15 different, or we are currently tracking about 15 pieces of legislation. Many of them we'll talk about today, some of which we won't. But there are lots of free services that you can do it online. There's one that's called Fast Track. There's another one that's called what is it called? Fast Democracy. There's another one that's called uh, just like a general bill track. I think so. So those are all free versions that are services that basically go and they do what's called a scrape of a website. So they go and pull information that's already publicly available. But there's on one of the pages, there's a website called LEGIS, so legis.ga.gov. That's the official state website where they post all the legislation. They'll post a blurb about what the legislation says or does, and they'll tell you what committee it's in and where it is, so you can track where a bill is. And when we get to le- legis.ga.gov, yeah, oh yeah, it's on this page. Sorry, thank you. So, so that website is for bill tracking, and that's the free version that's on um, the state website. What we offer is a another version which comes through our subscription model, but basically you sign up and then you're able to issue what we call campaigns. And so those are essentially think of them as like secondary websites, but you can put them out on social, you can put them anywhere really. It's based on the subject matter. And so you can track the bill and then you can say to your friend, you can send your friend an email and say, here's the you can take action, and you can email the committee members of where this bill is headed, right? You can also give them a phone call. So it gives you the option to email, text, phone call, send them a message on social media, all those sorts of things. So that's what we offer. But there's a free service out there already. It's just sometimes a little glitchy because it's a state resource. It has to update every night. It's not real time. So just to be fair. Um, so all that said, you have an opportunity to get a legislator in a room face to face, just like we're doing now. Get them in a room, invite them. They will come, they will show up. What we found is that small groups are much more effective because no one wants to feel attacked, right? And so if you have a small group of concerned citizens, you can sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, we understand you've got lots of competing interests, you've got a big job. Here's some things that we think are really important to us, and we want your support on them. And make them tell you why they don't support it. And then if they do, then say thank you for your support. How can we help you? Right? It's a conversation, but it's also transactional, right? You're putting them there to represent you. If they don't, then you have a means of remedying that, right? The vote matters. Um, and more importantly, your ongoing and continued support really matters. And so you want to be in a position to do that. Um, Talking to their staff is also important because again, these legislators are part-time. Their staffs, though, are full time. So even when they're not working, their staffs are. Their admins, their legislative aides are there year round, trying to figure out what their agenda is going to be, trying to figure out what communities want. And so it's really important to be involved. And as I said before, coalition building is really important. You want to make sure that if you have a group of friends, neighbors, relatives, etc., who are really interested in education issues, that you're talking. Meet once a quarter during the off season and say, hey, what are the things that we really want to protect? Whether it's school vouchers, whether it's uh, any sort of particular topic, right? It's what you all want. You have to tell them because otherwise they will say we didn't hear from the constituents, and they're going to vote on what they hear, good, bad, or indifferent. Okay, okay, okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, I didn't want to assume. I just said school vouchers. Yes, yes, ma'am. I I appreciate the correction. Yes, ma'am. So as you approach them, right, you want to build a relationship, but you also want to be you want to be very consistent. You want to say again where you stand on an issue. You want to tell them, uh, you know, we do or don't like this, and this is why. If you're talking to them face to face, emails, phone calls, all that's important too. You can do that concisely. Um, I would recommend not to just talk about more than a single issue at a time because it's just really challenging. Like again, they're looking at 10,000 things. Get them focused. Say we don't support school vouchers, for instance, and this is why. And we want you to not vote in any way that takes dollars out of our pockets and moves it to a different district. Right? That's language they will understand. One thing we found really helpful is, framing up some of these issues in ways where uh, you're giving people permission to say to vote the way you want them to vote. And so oftentimes that means having a neutral argument. So having an economic argument as to like why this helps bring jobs to our community or why this helps or why this hurts us by taking jobs away. It's kind of a universal response, right? I've not had any Congress or had any legislator not respond to an economic argument. Because again, dollars in community means support um, for their campaigns, frankly, right? Like they're running and they want people in the community to support them. So yeah, all right. I'm going to try to move us forward to a few pieces of legislation, but feel free to interrupt me uh, at any point. So House Bill 470. This is one bill that did not cross over, right? It didn't move from uh, out of the House hopper. That was still sitting in the House, waiting to be either sliced and diced or, uh, you know, brought back in some other way. It would prohibit the state and federal, local. Sorry. All right. So it does two things. This would prohibit state, federal, and local immigration enforcement in certain locations. So, for instance, uh, my reading of this was that the intent was to actually create more safe spaces for immigrant and refugees, and it would repeal all conflicting laws. So this law runs directly counter to a law we're going to talk about in a second, which does the opposite, right? So oftentimes you'll see two pieces of legislation in either chamber that do totally separate things, right? Remember I said before they have to build coalitions. So the person who sponsors the piece of legislation has to have co-sponsors. The co-sponsors have to then talk to committee chairs to make sure that they will even get an initial reading, right? All those things are part of this political wrangling process that people have to do. So this one bill, again, it got introduced, but it's still sitting in the hopper. It's not going anywhere. Yes, ma'am. Well, yeah. Yes, ma'am. So that's a very valid point. Why don't these legislators talk plainly, right? So remember, they're trying to make all this fit into code language and make it mirror existing law. For to some degree, yes, some of the language is intended to be vague, right? Um, and that's just true of any law, right? Because you have to be broad enough to kind of capture all the possibilities. But the reverse is also true in that because the language could be, you want to build coalitions. So if you want something to get some traction, you got to make it sound good enough so that your constituents don't come after you for doing something that's kind of not cool. Uh, it again, it's as people. Well, so I no. This. I love this. No, this is good. So part of that is it's easier. So that's a tactic. I'll put it this way. That is a tactic. So people can choose to frame an issue in a positive way or a negative, right? So if you look at this one, it says the law would prohibit state, federal, and local immigration enforcement in certain locations, right? It's pretty straightforward, honestly. To As we go along, you'll see there are other versions that aren't quite so straightforward. Um, there's another version of similar language that does the exact opposite, and it sounds almost the same. So If you're a legislator, you're trying to convince your colleagues to vote for something, and they don't read every piece of legislation. Their staff is supposed to, but let's be honest, they may not always, right? And so you have to, in order to build coalitions, you want to make sure that people can say, "Oh, this bill does this. It's helpful," right? Whether the language rings true versus being actually true is rooted in knowing what the legislation does. It's tactical. It's tactical. Yes, sir. Well, that's also why we have to be in the room. We have to make sure that, but you're right. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And they keep track of this, right? So the reason I put the House bill number at the top is that's how they generally refer to things. The reason the committees are here is so that you know where to look for it, and you can look up the chairpersons, you can you can look up the members. So if any of these things stand out, there are clear action items just based on each slide. Yes, ma'am. And actually, I pulled all these from one of those bill trackers. So because I'm a one person band, right? So I can't track all of these directly. Like I attend many sessions, but I can't be in all the sessions. So I set up alerts and I get an update every day of where these bills are, whether they moved out of committee or not, who's voted which way on them. So you see all that in the bill track software. Yes, ma'am. No, no, they're intentionally all they are really doing. Remember, I used the term scraping. They're just pulling information from the legis.ga.gov. That's really what they're doing. They're pulling so that information is not biased. It's what the language of the bill is. The other piece to remember is you can read the bill yourself. And so there's another bill we're going to talk through. Um, and this kind of practice, right? You want the bill to sound good, right? So that people support it whether it does what the title of the bill is or not, right? So that's something we'll talk through in just a second. Yes, yes, ma'am. So it's on. Let's see. I think you're ahead. Right there. Yes, ma'am. Welcome. All right. And tell me, I'm right at time, so tell me if we're okay on time, and I'll. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that works for me. I would say, um, so go to our website. That's the most important thing. So we're in the process of updating that. It's on the very last slide. If you check out our website, georgiainterfaithcenter.org, that's where you'll be able to sign up for our subscription service. So that gets you access to that bill tracker. It allows you to have other information about our partners. So all those coalition partners that are on the first couple of slides, we'll link over to their website. So if you're interested in any of those topics, you can check that out there. We also have it's where you can sign up for policy alerts. So we do issue policy alerts depending on if we think something's really good or really bad. And typically it takes that sort of poll. Like we let the session sort of go, and if things make it, they make it, and then we'll say something. If not, then we try not to get in the weeds. Um, 6 years. Yes. So our goal is to really train faith leaders. So that's really our function. Advocacy is one of the pieces is our main core work, but we do a bunch of other programs too. Yes, ma'am. So the way we look at it is we bring the faith voice to a number of topics. So, for instance, we support Georgia Majority for Gun Safety. So they have a piece of legislation that talks about safe storage, universal background checks, red flag laws. We support Interfaith Children's Movement, which does a lot of work to make sure that kids that are aging out of foster care have access to post secondary education. So we support other subject matter experts. We don't take top we don't take we have not pushed a particular bill just yet. That's not the work we want to do. We want to make sure that all members of the community are enabled and empowered to go push for the things that they want. And that's our core metric. It's how many people we train each year, how many faith leaders we're able to put into community, and make sure that legislators hear from you directly. Thank you. So that's the general stuff. I'll keep walking through the bills. I'm going to keep the recording going. I might cut it off just for the sake of it can ramble, but I'll do that. But we can keep talking. We can keep talking. Yes, ma'am. All right, still at that. It'll be right at the hour.